Doctors, nurses, and hospital staff of Reddit, what are your experiences? Funny, sad, horrible, with people waking from anesthesia? NSFW. Told to me by my wife, confirmed by the nurse. I was in bed, hospital room, waiting for surgery. They already gave me meds to calm me, but they knocked me out. 2 nurses come in to move me to a gurney, but they were small and I'm big, they can't move me over. My wife came over and poked me in the ribs saying, "You're snoring, roll over." And I rolled right onto the gurney. Had a patient in for an endoscopy. As a matter of course, we place a speculum, think ball gag, but a metal ring instead of a ball, in the mouth through which to pass the scope so the patient doesn't bite the scope once they're under. We typically place it right at induction of anesthesia. This patient had the presence of mind to ask us what the safe word was before he lost consciousness as we placed the speculum. One of the rare times the whole floor erupted in laughter. I once had a patient start totally trashing her sister, telling me how she has always been the black sheep of the family, is a scumbag and wants to bang her husband. She's just going off. And sitting in the doorway was the sister, the only one there to support her after surgery. You could tell it was crushing for her. This was probably an hour after the patient left PACU. Conscious but still pretty whacked out. So I'm an ER tech, and we have this regular that comes in all the time. She's an old black lady who has a lot of health issues, including dementia. This time, I'm actually not entirely sure why she was coming in, but whatever it was, she needed to be intubated. So we sedated her, put the tube in and did what we needed. When everything was finished, we called EMS to pick her up and take her back home. When they arrived, the nurse and I went in to prep her to leave. The lady is just starting to wake up from sedation. So, with the EMT standing in the room, we take out her Foley catheter. Then, she queefs. The nurse and I smirk at each other. But this is fairly common and not the funny part. The funny part is that the noise seemed to surprise her, and apparently remind her what was going on. Because she gasps and then looks over to the EMTs and says in an attempt at a sexy voice, "You boys ever seen a black coochie before?" Everyone in the room had to take a second to attempt to regain composure. But the EMTs ended up having to leave the room and the nurse is crouching on the ground trying not to die. Capital I. Since I still have the Foley in my hands, don't have this freedom, and am forced to try to keep my sides from launching into orbit. It's since become a running joke around the ER. I had a patient pet an invisible kitty that was named after me. The next day, was completely with it and was wondering what happened to that kitty. A patient woke up from his wisdom tooth removal begging the doctor to let him be David Bowie. The doctor actually asked how that was supposed to happen, and the answer was that it would be fantastic. When my husband woke up from having his wisdom teeth surgically removed, his nurse was a rather large lady, like 350 plus. He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're too beautiful to be a nurse. You should have been a model. Why don't you just come home with me and my wife?" Yes, he was propositioning a 3-way with a 50-year-old 350-pound nurse. Most awkward moment of my life. Not a hospital staff, but my great-grandfather had surgery one time and I was in the room when he woke up. He was a WWII veteran and was convinced that he was in an CPOW camp. He recognized me and told me I had to help him escape by killing the guards, nurses, because he knew I knew how to heal people. I was 16. Obviously a trained Krella. When the nurse came in, he was calm and kept motioning with his head at her to me and finally looked at me and said, "Heal her now." She always came back with another male nurse after that. Not a doc or nurse. When I got my wisdom teeth out, they strapped my arm down for the IV anesthetic. Apparently, before passing out, I looked up at the white-haired German dentist and said in my best Connery, "Goldfinger, do you expect me to talk?" The dentist didn't reply, but he did tell me after surgery that it was one of the funniest things anyone asked him in a haze. My father-in-law was in a car accident that shattered his face, several vertebrae, and his pelvis. This isn't so much a story about what he said, but what he did. He was in a coma for 3 weeks and had to be heavily restrained when coming out of it. He was a Marine in Vietnam. He was captured and escaped, and he still hated being restrained. My wife went to visit him on a Sunday, and the doctors told her that tomorrow he was going to be the first patient to use a new $30,000 restraint system that would cause him less discomfort. On Monday afternoon she visited again, and he was in the same restraints as before. My wife asked, and the nurse explained that he destroyed that restraint system. It lasted less than an hour. It wasn't salvageable. Not the doctor or the nurse. I had a lot of ear infections when I was younger. And my final time, I was about 7. I woke up to the Rugrats on a TV in the room. I hated the Rugrats at the time. Cue the following conversation. Me. Why are the Rugrats on? Doctor, you woke up earlier and said you wanted us to put on the Rugrats. We asked why. And you said that you hated the Rugrats and wanted to watch it so you could be angry. Me. Why did I want to be angry? Doctor, you said you wanted to be angry because you don't like being so happy all the time. Edit. Obligatory wow. One of my most upvoted comments is about my early life angst. Only behind my 5-word comment that referenced a trebuchet. Reddit works in mysterious ways. Tie. Went straight from the ER to surgery to put a plate in my badly broken arm. So I hadn't been on a ward etc prior to the operation. Came out of surgery and recovery and was being pushed in a hospital bed to a ward. We turned into a ward and it was full of elderly people. I was in my early 20s. I turned to the hospital porter pushing me and shouted, "Sorry, we seem to have taken a wrong turn. We're in the morgue." I was the patient. I'd had all 4 wisdom teeth out at once. And I woke up earlier than expected in recovery, early enough that they hadn't taken out the wadding at the back of my mouth meant to absorb the blood. So I woke up. Immediately felt like I was choking. And panicked. I leapt off the bed. And a bunch of nurses came to restrain me. Still out of it. I fought them and definitely gave one of them a good punch before they got me back on the bed. I passed out again straight away. Still feel bad about it. Poor nurse. 2 stories. 1. I had a lady in her 70s who drank martinis and took Xanax all day. Every day. So she had such a strong tolerance to the sedation I was giving her that she just totally stopped breathing while still awake. I had to say, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to bag you now." And she mouthed okay and I put the ambu bag on her face and force breathed for her until she got a respiratory effort back. 2. I was in helping with a heart procedure and the patient went into complete heart block and his heart stopped beating. I hop up to the table and start chest compressions while they are hurriedly trying to put in a temporary pacing wire. I had an arterial pressure waveform on the monitor, so I could see exactly how hard to do the compressions and the man never lost consciousness. So I'm doing chest compressions on a dude while he looks right at my face the whole time. So it was like press sorry for about 2 minutes until the pacing wire was in place. I shadowed a surgery once with this guy who woke up saying, "Give it to me straight, doc. Will I ever play the piano again?" All of us were cracking up and he then goes, "Oh. Wait. I don't know how to play the piano." Not a doctor. A friend was in a car crash. Pretty bad, he was in a coma for 2 months. He had a female doctor. For 2 months until he came out of his coma, every time his doctor was checking on he would reach up and grab her breast. Guessing he heard her voice. When we told him about, he did not believe us. So he asked her and she confirmed it. Said she never stopped him because it seemed to keep him calm. I'm not a doctor nurse. But I heard about this after my wisdom teeth surgery. I apparently was still on anesthesia. And when they wheeled me out I had both arms stuck out and was making plane noises. They asked me what I was doing and I told them I was becoming my final form of a plane. Still do not know why I was doing it. My first memory when waking up from shoulder surgery was a somewhat panicked nurse rummaging through the blankets at the bottom of my bed repeatedly muttering, "Where are his legs? Where are his legs?" I always cross my legs when I sit lay down, and apparently I must have done this as I was initially coming off the anesthesia. It freaked me out for a second. But then I processed what was going on. The nurse seemed relieved when I mumbled "there right here" and nearly kicked her in the face when I extended my legs. 3 times. The first time when I was 5. Tonsil surgery. My family is from Norway. And my grandmother always kept a pewter model of a longboat on her mantle. Just to explain why a 5-year-old would wake up screaming, "Get me back to the longboat." And then apparently, to quote my mother, go all Linda Blair on the doctors when they came in to try to give me antibiotics. That was nearly 25 years ago, and my family still likes to joke about me managing to shriek my head off and throw punches after having just come out of throat surgery. By age 13, I'd tamed down some. And apparently only muttered and grilly at everyone while waking up. Age 26. All the fight had gone out of me. And I just cried whenever a nurse asked me a question. "How is your pain?" "Not bad." "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry." "Can you sit up for me?" Uncontrollable sobbing. "Okay then. Let's get you some apple juice." Fully disconsolate. Edit because I can't count. I was working in the pediatric ER and sedating a skater kid 14 or 15. We are talking more a wannabe suburban kid rather than a punk kinda kid that obviously joined a frat in college. His mom is there in the room as he starts waking up once we had his wrist set and in the cast. His mom is typical well-to-do suburban mom who spends lots of time at yoga and PTA meetings, that is. Not trashy at all, and family was likely from a well-to-do part of town. My buddy, who is fairly hairy on his arms etc., reached across his upper chest to grab an IV line. Kid was half asleep. Raised his head up with his eyes still closed and licked my buddy's arm with this exaggerated lick like it was an ice cream cone. Kid flops his head back onto the pillow and his mom just looks mortified in the 2-3 seconds that pass before he slurs out, "Man, I sure do love to lick some pussy." His mom immediately turned bright red and walked out of the room, and we all busted out laughing except the guy who got licked. The ER doc was this young petite girl, and she said she peed herself a little, she was laughing so hard. For months we would give that guy lick motions in the air when we passed him in the hall and putting Rolling Stone stickers on his locker etc. I still give him crap about that from time to time. My favorite is to catch him chatting or something standing at the desk and to lean over and sniff his forearm and ask if he has been fishing. Not a doctor or nurse. When my sister was 16, she had back surgery to repair a ruptured disc in her lower back. Apparently, the meds that they gave her before she was put under gave her low enough inhibitions that instead of counting backward from 10, she started belting out the lyrics to Roxanne. The ER staff later told my mom that not only were they amazed that someone that young knew the lyrics, that the way that she started singing was one of the funniest things they had seen in an ER. I'm not the medical professional in this story. My husband had emergency surgery a few years ago, and when he woke up, he was just different. I can't explain it. He recognized who I was, but his personality was completely different and the way he spoke to me was completely different. It's sort of like in movies where people wake up in someone else's body. It freaked me the duck out. 36 hours later, it was like he just woke up and was himself again. The weird part is, he had no memory of the past 36 hours. He remembers being sick and he remembers the emergency room. But after that, nothing. A lot of people came to visit him in that time period too. A bunch of family and everyone from the office, and he has no memory of any of them. The only thing I can think is that whatever medication that was used in the anesthesia that gawked him finally worked its way out of his system. I woke up from knee surgery and demanded a vodka and coke with no ice. Also, for some reason when I woke up I was freezing cold and shivering. One of the nurses hooked me up to some heater which blew warm air under the covers from the bottom of the bed. I then likened myself to Marilyn Monroe. I'm a 6'2" athletic guy. God told a story. When I was 8, I got a knee surgery. While on anesthesia, the travel between my hospital room and the OR tough, I was in a Formula 1 car. So I would make all the noise. telling people to faster. Make the sound of the tires too. The guys told my mom it was the funniest transfer they ever had. Everybody was laughing, including people in the hallway. The only thing I could think of as the patient was that I surprised a lot of nurses with how quickly I shook off the anesthetic. I would be walking around an hour later and getting changed ready to go home. They just looked dumbfounded. I was coming around from surgery and the nurse who was looking after me had a crush on a guy I dated when I first started nursing, several years before. It was rather surreal to go from deep sleep to talking about an ex-boyfriend I had hardly thought about in years. I almost feel it was an abuse of her power. I could have said anything coming out. You don't expect to be interrogated about a past relationship the first thing waking up from major surgery. In the end I found out some gossip. The relationship didn't last long and apparently he was hurt that I wasn't devastated when we broke up and that I started dating someone new within a few weeks. Slightly different in that it wasn't anesthesia, but rather sedative meds. I worked in a hospital years ago and once had a patient who had an extreme paradoxical reaction, opposite of what is expected, to her Ambien. She went off the rails. She started hallucinating that she was in a hostage situation with a man who was killing babies. One nurse went in the middle of the night while doing her rounds and the patient attacked her with a folded wire hanger and severely beat her in the face and head. The nurse ended up with multiple broken bones in her face, blacked both eyes, and a number of deep wounds on her face. She was gone for a while on workman's comp but eventually quit, stating the experience had traumatized her and she didn't want to be in the building again. Don't know whatever happened to the patient but I doubt she would have been punished or charged, since she was not in her right state of mind and nobody expected such a reaction to the medicine. Was the patient in this one? When I was 12 I had heart surgery and was getting wheeled down to the operating room. I was completely transfixed on my knee when I then asked the nurse if I could pet the kitty. She said sure, so I started petting and scratching my knee going AWW, good kitty kitty. When I woke up from that surgery I spent about 5 days in anesthetic hell, like a medically induced coma but not quite as severe, and cussed out every nurse that asked me how I was doing. I was intubated so I had to scratch out my hatred onto scrap paper and hope they could translate it. When I was off of the cocktail they were giving me I was back to my cheerful self and felt mortified about calling the pretty nurses working the ICU ward at Children's Hospital a bunch of stupid hunts. Apparently it happens all the time but I still cringe when I think about it. My brother had knee surgery done, and at the time was running his own business and was stressed out. When he was coming off the anesthesia he was trying to get out of bed and demanding to let him go because he had to get back to work. It took 3 nurses to hold him down to convince him to stay in bed. The sad and funny thing is, he remembered the whole thing, but he said it was like he felt he couldn't stop himself. Needless to say he was really embarrassed the rest of his hospital stay. I'd like to seize this chance to say sorry to that poor guy who was around when I woke up. First thing I said was, I gotta puke. And I did so generously while he helped me suffer through this. Then I looked at him and said, "What's your name?" I don't know what he answered, because he reminded me of a friend of my sister. So I told him, "Well, you look more like a Tobias to me." He laughed and said that I look like a Hugo to him then. My dizzy mind then thought it was nice to say, "So does your mom." Then I laughed and puked again. I fell asleep soon after and another nurse was there when they brought me back to my room. So I never got the chance to apologize. While it's a good story, I still feel a little embarrassed. Can just hope that guy has seen worse. I work on a floor full of patients post-surgery. One of my favorite patient comments was someone fresh from the PACU, post-anesthesia care unit, who looked straight at me and said, "You put a bag on my whiner. Didn't you?" Referring to his catheter. His mom and I were in stitches. It made a surgery that went longer and worse than expected a little bit happier. Woke up from a 2-hour reconstructive surgery on my ear. They had removed most of the skin between my ear and my head, opened it like a door and built me a new eardrum. As soon as I woke up, I had to clean. So I started walking around the ward in my assless gown, trailing an IV, and looking for stuff to throw away. Nurse was not amused, but I refused to stop cleaning. She gave me a piece of paper and told me to throw this away then go back to bed. I agreed. Also, what's with everyone being put under for wisdom teeth removal? I had mine yanked. Then I drove home 15 minutes later. Edit. Jesus. I feel lucky my wisdom teeth came through.